billing. I mean, that's kind of a unique aspect of what the payments industry is about. What technology is doing to change every single aspect of enabling the exchange of goods and services and furthering the growth of commerce. And customer and consumer expectation. And that's sort of the other piece I'm always struck by. It's all about getting that next great customer experience, whether that's a consumer or a business. So earlier this month, for those of us all in this payment space, we know the Federal Reserve has devoted a significant amount of time, energy, and effort convening two task forces in particular, one on risk and security, but one looking at the growth and development of faster payments and real-time payments. And earlier this month, the Federal Reserve announced FedNow, which is their real-time payment network, which is set to launch in 2024. And this will join the work that's already being done by the Clearinghouse's real-time payment network that will allow payment providers to receive faster payments and make those funds available to customers in real time. Ultimately, the end goal for all of this is a faster payment system that is interoperable, delivers ubiquity, inclusivity, security, efficiency. So we've got a really exciting panel coming up here this morning, which is looking at instant gratification, because we're impatient consumers, whether we're business consumers or private consumers. We want it, and we want it yesterday. I'm really excited. This panel is going to be moderated by Elizabeth McQuarrie, who is a partner at Glenbrook. And for those of you that don't know, Glenbrook is an amazing firm comprised of some pretty impressive professionals like Elizabeth that bring truly unique expertise in the payment space. Elizabeth leads the firm's global payments practice, and she has over 15 years of experience helping develop payment products and solutions. So I know this is going to be an exciting discussion on real-time payments. It's happening in real time. I mean, the focus going on right now within our industry is really looking at what the Fed's going to do, what the clearinghouse is doing, and the potential and the excitement that it's going to bring to the space. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth and her team of speakers for this morning's discussion. So please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning, everyone. And I really appreciate, of course, Amy's kind introduction, but also the beautiful transition to payments and payment developments in real time, because that's there's so much happening. You know, even as a dedicated professional on payments, it's a full-time job to keep up with what's happening in this space. And I know if it's not your only job, it must be a tremendous challenge. So we're hoping to demystify some of that for you today, and also give you a chance to interact with a fantastic group here. We have both solution providers, solution enablers, as well as a bank getting us out there, connecting it to the services to you as consumers and businesses. So we want to focus in on instant payments, and that presents a sort of definitional question as we get started. You know, a lot of us experience instant payments already. So what sort of problems are we solving? And at Glenbrook, we really enjoy the power of story and, you know, real life tales from the payments universe. And one of my favorite stories here is one of our partners went into kind of a CVS-like store, saw that they had Google Pay on the POS now, and so pulls out his phone and uses Google Pay. And he says to the clerk, so how many people are using Google Pay? I hadn't seen it in here before. She said, nobody. And he said, well, I just use it. And she said, no, you pay with your phone. So you can't dispute that, really. But we're hearing a lot of terms: instant payment, real-time payment, faster payments. I'd like to get the perspective of the panelists on what that really means and what it means for those of us in this room in particular as enablers in mobile payments. So I'll just start here with Renee and get your perspective on what instant payment means in today's environment.
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. I think for Citibank, as we are exposed to instant payment capabilities around the globe, I think we're right now actively participating in about 23 markets. There's a lot of instant-like experiences, like Elizabeth describes, but I think for us, what really means an instant payment is that transfer of funds from the originator is instantly available to the beneficiary. In that sense, it's really meant as an alternative to cash. I think some of the markets where we see increased adoption, you want to have that transaction experience that as you acquire something and goods, services, products, whatever they may be, that the recipient or the provider of the good service is the direct instant recipient of those funds. So it's not just I click on something and I get that reassurance something has been paid, or as I like to swipe my card at credit cards at Home Depot, I know they're not going to get the money right away, thankfully for me. But that's, of course, not that real experience. What we really want to get to is that instant gratification that as goods and services are instantly provided, that reward is right away there. And it should similarly also be with returns or refunds. That should ideally be instant and similarly instantly as well.
I think, first of all, instant means exactly what it says it is. It happens instantly. And there are a lot of experiences that do seem instant, and they're instant until they're not.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you have heard of chargebacks? Anybody? Okay, of course you have. And it's not the lines in the boxes. In payments, the lines in the boxes are easy, it's the exceptions. I think that instant payments are when everything is instant. It's gone, it's done, everything is over. And we have that now. We have the ability to do that now. So we should really strive for that in applications where it makes sense.
So let's get geeky.
Yes.
How long is instant?
Seconds.
End to end, seconds, okay?
Seconds.
2 seconds, 20 seconds?
I think when you're getting 2 seconds, 20 seconds, you're kind of in the same ballpark. But, on our RTP network, we've been averaging, I think last time I looked, 2.3 seconds round trip.
Okay, so RTP, swipe your card, hand over cash. All are instant so far. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just making some comparisons there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Peter Gordon with PayFi. So instant to me is really about instant messaging and not necessarily the payment. So when we just talked about bill pay exchange, that's a good example of using the non-financial messaging like request for payment to ask someone for a payment. And that to me is what really sets apart RTP. We know the marketers didn't make up the name RTP or even FedNow. So I would call it the rich data network. And so that's the takeaway is it's really about instant messaging between entities. And so when you can have a rich experience like we just saw with bill pay exchange, where you can say how much you owe, when you owe it, that's important. On a consumer or on a small business invoice, if you can say you mowed my lawn, here's when you mowed my lawn, and I can pay that instantly. That data associated with it, that's what's transformational. That instant information from an entity through the financial network system, that is what is game changing. And that's what I think is really important to take away from what instant means to me.
So Peter, do you mean the data, the rich information on top of the instant payment transfer, or are you separating those?
So it depends. So I think we're going to have, unfortunately, so we see like bill pay exchange, is that separate or together? So I think we may have, hopefully there's alignment over the clearinghouse using as getting payment geeky, the ISO 20022 rails, and we align messages and they can all travel over the Fed now. I'm sitting between the Fed and the clearinghouse. And hopefully we can align on those things. But interoperability takes time, patience, and really payment geeky stuff. So I think as a good consultant, it depends, and time will tell.
Cassie?
I just want to add, because I think these guys are right with their description. One thing we didn't mention is availability, which I think is important to note. So when we think about faster payments, we think about availability 24/7, 365, which is a key feature, I think, that a lot of end users think about when they think about how they might operationalize faster payments, for instance, in their businesses. The other thing I'd mention, I think it's important, I just want to underscore what Peter said about rich data. We talk a lot about speed and instantaneous and irrevocability, but there is a lot of opportunity, I think, that comes with the rich data capability that faster payments offer. When we think about kind of faster payments in general and what we're doing, at least on the infrastructure side, with offering up kind of modernized rails or modernized foundation to support our country's payment system into the future. There's a lot to think about there in terms of innovation and what that might look like for payment in general as well moving forward. So it's not just about the transaction and instantaneous. I think there's a lot that this offers up to us now and in the future.
Excellent, sort of jumping into the multiple aspects of this. And I'd like to also get into deeper, what does this mean for the end users? You touched on that, I think, but either to consumers or to businesses. And how is this going to change their experience in the payment system? And perhaps just as important, what's going to be required for them to get to the goodness of what we're hoping to provide here?
Yeah, so I can start it off. I think that's a good question. We can spend a lot of time on. I think that from an end user perspective, it offers a lot of flexibility in how you manage your money. If you can instantly pay, and you can instantly receive and actually be able to use your funds, it kind of reduces risks, especially for, let's think of just consumers, individuals who might have very tight budgets, right? They don't have to do same day check cashing or anything like that to cover bills, arguably because they'd have money available instantly and they'd be able to manage that kind of more exactly. I think the same thing can be said of businesses, especially small businesses. We've seen a lot of interest there and a lot of value that's been articulated on that front. I think what we've seen in terms of future opportunities, at least in other countries, is there's more integration of payments into services, for example. It offers more seamless experiences. We're seeing, I think, a little bit more kind of integration across so that payments become part of the experience, not something that you might do on the outside of it. And so I'm sure, Steve, you have a lot of things to say about that.
I mean, we'd say the same kinds of things. I mean, that it will, first of all, what will consumers expect? They'll kind of expect what they already expect, but they're not getting. And I think that's one of the things that people expect instant. And in terms of how they'll think about it, let's take it 10 years from now, they won't. Well, one of the things I think is most fascinating is you talk to folks in the UK where they've had instant payments for years, and you have to explain to it what you're talking about because they just don't get it. They say, well, of course, that's just how payments work. But I think that the other thing about it is we came up with all kinds of things. We looked around the world. We came up with all these ideas of what folks would be using faster payments for. And the first half a dozen use cases out of the box that actually went across the network were ones we hadn't really thought of that much. We knew they kind of existed, but we didn't realize what the appeal would be. And I think that if we do this well, we're going to feel really, really, really dumb a few years now because we didn't get what the impact was going to be. But somebody will build an application or bring out a product that does it.
Renee?
I think there's a couple of things that we have to really keep in mind. And maybe as full disclosure, even though I work for Citibank, I don't work for the consumer bank division. I work for the division we call affectionately Treasury and Trade Solutions. So large corporate entities are our customers. And some of the struggles and the discussions that we're having around this arena is, what does this really mean for corporate treasury? A lot of our clients are, if I can say, addicted to credit cards, as we are as consumers as well. I love my little Costco credit card, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. And it gives me personal working capital. I can spread my expenses. I get rewards for spending money. right now, as the issuing bank, Citibank is providing that as a reward to the card holders. If you want to replace that with instant payments, I think there's a lot of advantages for some of the larger companies. Take, for example, a Costco. You can get direct deposits into your account for the services that you provide. But as a consumer, I'm used to a certain service and a certain reward. So what is that going to mean? Is my Costco membership now going to be free? If Amazon were to adopt instant payments, do I get Prime for free? And I think those are some of the changes in the industry that we still need to figure out. As a bank, we will support all of the networks, but to be very transparent, we're not getting the rewards that we can be giving these rewards and gratifications. The awareness does not seem to have sunk in yet with some of the larger companies that shifts to them. If in this particular market, we want to have that happen. In other markets, like for example, India or Argentina, it's a non-starter of a discussion. Instant payments are required. You have to do it to simply stay in business because the motivations and the driving factors of the government are very different. On the other hand, what we also see is there's a lot of opportunity. And what we really hope, and on a personal note, with having 3 young kids, I personally subscribe, is that public sector and non-public government profit-oriented organizations are going to really adopt this. The only reason I have a checkbook is for church and for school. And they only accept checks. They don't want nothing else. I cannot even pay with cash at my school for the $3 pizza party because nobody wants to run to the bank to do the deposit because the banks are charging for the deposits now. So if we can switch that to an instant mechanism, and I know there's mobile wallets out there, but they charge me 3% to use it. So these are just all little examples of how the whole industry needs to change. And it requires not just the clearinghouse or the Fed to come up with a scheme or us as a bank to do this. Everybody, every participant in it has to have a role. Last but not least, I think we also need to keep in mind that as providers of these services, and I like the comments about the rich data, it's going to require a lot of changes in our thinking as well. If we start shifting transactions to instant payments, what's the point of an end-of-day account statement? What's the point of an intraday account statement? There is no point. The moment you paid, you settled. We no longer need to chase our systems for FedWire reference numbers. When you paid, that is your FedWire reference number. You're done. It's settled. It's taken care of. So it's going to require a lot of changes on different elements. And I think it's very exciting to kind of see, and I've seen some interesting ideas here as well, on how we're going to completely re-engineer the entire rails of us doing payments. And we have to actually completely rethink the entire process. And maybe that's the hardest part of all of this because we're coming from a world of legacy. Yes, we still run mainframes. Yes, we still run cron jobs. We have to for some very old legacy things, but I would love to get away with them and replace them for a simpler, leaner infrastructure.
So I'm going to come back to that question in just a second with Peter about what's really involved in transitioning from legacy to a new realm. But I wanted to say that after that, we'll take to see if anyone has questions before we dive further into the topic. So Peter, you know, PayFi is very deep in this space of trying to help transition and create the sort of bridge. What's involved in all of that?
It's just magic, just a little black box. So it is work, and it starts with the good work that, you know, the clearinghouse and now the Fed's been doing for the Fed has led for the last 5 years, is starting out with a set of standards and then adopting those standards and aligning to it. It's not perfect, just like, you know, a lot of people in the room have dealt with MasterCard and Visa and the rules and the ISO 8583 rules over the years. Now we're dealing with the new modern XML 20022 and how we can map that and how we can utilize it in the legacy environments. As Renee pointed out, you know, we deal with a lot of the small banks. We announced the first community bank will be connected to the clearinghouse in October. We also will be enabling, probably not public, we should probably say it anyways, because the MasterCard person left the room, but we're enabling the MasterCard use case as well through bill pay exchange.
You do that a lot, by the way.
I do. I know. Sorry. What can I do? So, so we'll enable, and what that really means is mapping this old legacy stuff. Like, if people know what MasterCard RPPS is, it was an 85, 83 old school flat file, and now we're mapping it to the new modern 2022. And how does that align to the clearinghouse? So it's work, it's geeky work, it's detailed work, but it has nothing to do, the consumers shouldn't care, the businesses shouldn't care. It's folks like PayFi and other great companies in the US, all these fintechs that do that plumbing. Travis and I say we're plumbers. So effectively, we're putting all the plumbing in place so the real magic can happen and the consumer experiences can happen.
There's a lot of plumbers on this panel.
He's a plumber, unfortunately.
So what's involved for the bank with making this transition? Because they're really the front line.
Sure. I think it's a transition. It's really important. So I'll be at a bank on Friday. I was one in New York yesterday, and they're all struggling with this. But I implemented my first core banking system in 1989, 30 years ago, Labor Day weekend. So 30 years ago, I did a Fiserv ITI over Labor Day weekend, and that bank still exists. Is still running that ITI. It's now a Fiserv Premier. And so the idea is, well, how do you surround that with a modern architecture? I'm going to a $100 billion bank. They don't want to replace the architecture. So what I think PayFi and others are doing is we're putting a modern 24/7, 365 architecture that insulates the core. And some people say, oh my God, but you think about it, so that insulates them because cores go down. Cores need batch updates. Core needs settlement, as Renee talked about. So really, I think that is the hollowing out of the cores. We can have a whole nother core modernization discussion, but that really ultimately is us and others are taking the burden of interfacing to the networks and then just having as light an interaction with the core as possible to make it happen.
Is this a transitional phase, or is it going to be the new normal?
Well, we could have a whole nother debate on that. I think it's a transition and a long transition. I mean,
Okay.
for people, as we know, we've been working on this for a long time. So probably at least, I don't know, hopefully I'll end my career in the next 10 years doing this in that transformation. So.
Any burning questions before we take up another topic? We're going to talk about what's next in this space as our final phase, so a real transition. Okay, we're doing a good job. So we want to focus on, what's next in the space, what the sort of barriers that we're looking at. I know that, everyone has the particular area that they're focusing on. And since we planned this panel, certainly the competitive landscape is projected to change in going forward. And I'm going to ask Cassie to tell us all about that.
Yeah, so I think Amy did a great job of giving you an overview of where we are in terms of a FedNow announcement. In terms of how we're building out, I guess, immediate next steps there, just so there's a sense. The Federal Reserve's spending a lot of time in the next few months, starting really immediately upon our announcement earlier this month, working with the industry to understand kind of what service design we ought to build out and what those specific requirements would be. So we have a Federal Register notice out in the public sphere. We have a commentary period open for 90 days from the publication date. So I think it's like early November that we'll close that. We'll use those responses, those comments to specific questions that we included in our announcement, along with feedback we're getting from kind of direct industry engagement as well to help us build that out. And then we'll be shooting to get out that final service description with more specific timing for coming to market with services, hopefully within just the next few months is our plan, very shortly following the close of our comment period. So that's kind of immediate next steps. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with this.
Yeah, I mean,
regarding
you have any, is there anything you can or want to share about what FedNow will be that that's already determined?
Yeah, So we've announced, we've announced and we're seeking feedback on elements of the service. We're considering initial limits for transactions that we'd process at 25,000. The proposal is that we would use ISO 20022 as our standard. We would settle in master accounts, the Federal Reserve. The service would be available the same way other Federal Reserve services are available to the same kinds of institutions. We're not necessarily thinking of expanding access at this time. However, we would allow providers on behalf of banks to send and receive messages. So we also have a few other outstanding services that we're looking for feedback on, around directories, for example, around request for pay, and whether that would be an interesting or useful feature. And what we're going to do then is take all this back and think about not just what we'd want our final service design to be, but maybe in what sequence we would put out those services for the industry. The hope is, and we recognize, we're going to put out a service and hopefully have really quick connections into the service, but we wouldn't envision that we would get to ubiquity immediately upon releasing the service. And so a big priority for us is making sure the industry is working in parallel with us and is ready for us when we're ready for them.
So I'll jump around a little. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's next? And one is, I think I'll ask you as a potential user of both of the services and one coming into the market, how does that sort of impact your calculus? And then I know you've got even more input on the business model that we've got underway.
Right. So back to, I guess, to the previous presentation of MasterCard with the little pie chart, 13% was still cash. The bank's reality is going to be, if you translate that to settlement and clearing options, we're just adding more towards the stack. We would love to get rid of certain options, but for now, at least initially, it's going to add to that. Citibank being present in 96 markets, there's a kind of a simple math equation you can throw on that. So as a bank and I guess as a whole industry, this is a massive transformation that actually is going to take quite a long time. It's going to also have very deep ramifications. The entire ecosystem that we operate as an institution, and we're part of a large ecosystem with clearing and settlement networks in the middle. It doesn't help to just have a shiny app on the phone or to just have a nice little front office online portal. All of our infrastructure end to end needs to become true real-time 24/7. AML, KYC, screening, sanctions, you name it. And unfortunately, I don't think they're here in the room, not all of our providers of these services are truly 24/7. OFAC is not really truly 24/7. Don't tell the bad guys. So it takes some time, and we need to implement that. We need to drive those changes. Obviously, we're a US-based bank, and when we operate outside of the US, I'm still subject to US sanctions and laws that I have to overlay, for example, on UK faster payments. So all of this makes it for an interesting experience. However, I completely agree with what Peter said. We have to think about the customer experience, whether the customer is a consumer or it's a corporate entity. And we have to shield them from all of this. And this is where it really gets hard and challenging because nothing is really alike. Even here in the US, with all the different payment means and options that we have, it's hard to shield our customers because some banks are really nice and they help us truly with same-day ACH. Other banks, same-day ACH just meant us paying them same-day ACH, and it trickles down into the accounts of the ultimate beneficiary. My biggest disenchantment was pop money. Yeah, it popped on my phone right away, but the person sitting next to me, nothing popped on their phone for another 3 days. So I think we need to really work through it. And I think what is really important is we need that dialogue. And I think there's a lot of good developments, but I think where we need to take some of the next step is we need to also really bring in some of the entities that are really going to drive it. So for example, if I look at instant payments here in the US, the biggest market that we see is, for example, right now, people who use debit cards or prepaid cards. These are people that clearly don't have access or don't prefer to use credit cards. students in universities, recent graduates, their credit score is usually, let's just say, not great. So it's not that they don't like credit cards, they can't get them or they cannot really use them. So they use debit cards, they use instant payment forms. That might be the first real wave of adoption if they can switch it from something physical to something on their phone or on their device. So the adoption with that is going to probably gradually change. But that means we may have to talk to the likes of an Amazon, a Google, a Microsoft with their Xbox franchise, because that's where they do a lot of these transactions. And these companies have been on the receiving end on a lot of this. We have not yet seen them be very open outwards and thinking with us, because we need them as much as infrastructure players, because they represent the larger consumer community. And back to my previous point, they need to find ways to entice it. If I use an instant payments to subscribe to my Xbox Live for my kids, what's in it for me? I lose money right away, but what do I get? Do I get a 13-month on the year-long subscription? We have to figure these things out, and I think that's going to be a continuous dialogue. That I think we're all a little bit eager to get to the tipping point where we can really start seeing some big, broad adoption of these capabilities.
Thanks. And Steve, what's next with RTP?
All right. Well, first of all, some of the things are what you would expect. We reach a little bit over half of the country right now. We'll continue to expand that. As Peter mentioned, we have a number of banks and credit unions that are in the pipeline that'll be coming on, really pretty much constantly now. And so that'll expand the reach of the network. We're also doing things to expand the uses of the network. We already have a number of things going on, but they're primarily someone paying someone else. So Cassie mentioned request for payment. It's something that's built into the network now, but we're doing some things working with a number of financial institutions and billers and such to actually get that started, prime the pump. So we have a number of pilots that are going to be going on really over the next year or so, which will start out, small, friends and family, that type of thing, but then expand into a more general deployment. And we think request for payment is actually a game changer. As we saw with the previous presentation, folks aren't really satisfied with a lot of the ways they pay bills right now. We know that. We believe that a request for payment is actually something that helps to bridge that. It allows something that is biller initiated. Doesn't have to be at bill time. It could really be, when someone's about to go late, but it gives them that immediate ability to pay the bill, no enrollment or anything like that. And so we think that is a huge change. We're going to see what happens in the market, and we can refine that as we move forward. So that's the other thing. The one other thing I will say is, if you had asked me the same question a month or two ago, the answer would be the same. We're just pursuing the strategy of expanding the use and expanding the uses of the RTP network.
So we're going to see, certain financial institutions will start pushing out with the billers request
Mhm.
payment for payment in the near future.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
I want to connect you with my financial institution. Okay.
Okay.
Peter.
So we're over time, but just to sum up real quick. So I think for the fintechs in the room, it's a good time to be a plumber. I mean, putting all this complexity that was described by Renee, and now with the Fed and the clearinghouse and the billers, that is the journey. And so it's not the pretty stuff, but the middle and the back office, connecting banks, billers, networks together to make this all happen is really what the journey's about in the next. So the other front ends can be really make changes. So I'm looking forward to the journey. Yeah.
Well, I think part of that journey is continuing the dialogue, right? And we previously agreed that we were going to share with you guys what we think is an important venue for that dialogue, and it's the Faster Payments Council. I'm going to leave it to one of our members, maybe Steve, to tell us about it.
Sure. The Faster Payments Council launched a little while ago. It's already up running. We've got, I don't even know what the number is now, 170 or so members.
That's right.
And it's really a way of bringing together everyone from across the spectrum. It's not just solution providers. It's not just networks. It's not just financial institutions, representatives of consumers, end users, academics, a broad variety. And the idea is let's get together and figure out ways of actually addressing some of the common concerns, some of the barriers there might be to adopting faster payments. We actually have some of our initial deliverables coming out that are very pragmatic ways of saying, here's something that you can use to help, whether it's a provider helping their customers understand what it is that's going on, to better ways of working together to solve common problems like preventing fraud, those types of things. It's up, it's running, really very, very engaged, and we want everyone to be a member.
Yeah. I didn't realize we had.
I didn't either,
Yeah.
but I think
There we
probably
go.
yeah.
As I work on new payment system development in other countries, I have to say one of the starkest contrasts is the amazing, shall I say, proclivity to have associations like ETA and the new Faster Payments Council, because these just do not exist elsewhere. So instead you have all of these providers and industry representatives, stakeholders, talking around each other, everybody trying to get in to talk to the central bank on the, down low, and it is just a mess. So I really encourage people to take advantage of a venue like this, if you will. And so that speaks, I think, to the common goals of the association. And also, it wasn't planned when we first got into this, but wanted also to let you know that Glenbrook and the Faster Payments Council are going to be doing a first of a 3-year survey of the industry about what we're doing with faster payments. And this is, I think, a really important opportunity to contribute to the dialogue. And so a lot of you are going to receive a request to comment or provide your opinions in this survey in the near future. We're hoping to have it out shortly after Labor Day. That's the plan. And the findings will be presented to the fall meeting in late
I believe
October
so, yes.
of the Faster Payments Council. And
In
as you might
Boston.
imagine, there
In Boston.
are
Another pitch for Boston. In
absolutely for Boston, where Peter lives. We're all coming to Peter's house.
We are hosting a party. I'll throw it out. Tuesday night of that Faster Payments at the Italian Kitchen on the seaport.
All right,
Be
I
there.
can write this
All
down.
invited
All right,
on Travis's credit card.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, and then our time is up. Yeah. Can you speak just a little louder?
Early on, when the Fed launched the faster payments initiative and the kind of risk control initiative, I was under the impression that they pretty explicitly said that they would not launch their own faster payment service, and I was just curious on the panel's opinions on why they did that and reactions when you heard that was happening.
So I would just, for a point of correction, so since 2010, when the Fed started the initial, they always put out there as if the industry did not act, they would step in and be a processor. So I think that was always out there, and I think that is what they're doing because of the some of the banks, some of the people in the ecosystem don't feel that, and I don't think it's accurate, by the way, this statement, but just you're asking why. I think there's some concern that everyone isn't part of the network, which I think it's in the US, we have a really complex banking system like no other banking system in the world, 10,000 banks, 100,000 merchants. And so having that complexity, I think it's a great idea to have 2 processors, 2 networks, as we do today in our wire system, as we do today in our ACH system, as we have multiple debit networks, 12, 15 debit networks, 2 major credit card networks. So it's good to have competition.
Cassie, Steve?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. I think the question was about reactions, though, so I was going to go
Okay.
last. I don't know
All
if
right.
anyone
Oh,
else
sure.
wants to articulate
Well,
reactions.
I mean, I don't think it's a secret that we did not think it was necessary for the Federal Reserve to enter the market. We actually think it's going to delay adoption, although I got to tell you, I've been maybe rethinking that recently. one of the things that the Fed announcement has done is it's created a great deal of interest in the network, and our actual number of inquiries that we've been getting has tripled, folks getting on the RTP network. So we do thank you for that.
Free advertising.
But, you know, the way I look at it is it's done. The Fed's going to be in the network. We'll concern ourselves with that in 2024.
Okay. Renee, anything before we pass to Cassie?
We're used to having many different networks available in different countries. This may sound slightly odd coming from a bank, but we in this particular case welcome a bit more regulatory push. I think it would be good. We all know it's coming. We all know this is going to happen. And while obviously we have a lot of free economy, free market structures in place, to get a bit of more focus and drive towards more streamlined, efficient, and effective networks to eventually, very plainly speaking, just make things for consumers easier is definitely welcome. If the initiative of the Fed is going to help usher and move that along, that would be great. On a personal note, if I could be at a title company and not have to wait for the processor to check the FedWire reference number for me purchasing another house because nobody knows where the money is, and we can switch to an instant transfer when the limits go a little bit higher, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Let me. So you're correct. I don't think the Fed said we would never enter the space. I think that from our perspective, we like to let the private sector lead and address issues as they're able, and our, us only step in if we feel it's necessary. We took a lot of time to analyze what we might do here. We have a very high bar for entering as a service provider in the payment space. So we worked with the industry. I mentioned the FRN, the Federal Register notice that we put out late last year when we first offered up the idea of doing this service. We had about 400 comments. Of those, 90% of comments were in support of our entering the market and providing this. Issues that were raised as concerns were accessibility, equitable access, kind of along those lines, competition, quality of service, and also resiliency and safety and security for the system overall. As Peter mentioned, we really aren't doing anything different per se than how we operate in other elements of legacy systems. And so that's kind of our hope. The Treasury also came out with a report late last year as well, encouraging us from their perspective after doing their analysis to think about how we might operate in this space. So I think from the Fed's perspective, we've been very thoughtful. We spent a lot of time analyzing this, and I think we've been generally very reactive to what the industry at large has asked of us. And so, our goal is to reach ubiquity, whether that's through interoperability, one of several ways, and however that works. We're really just looking to ensure that we offer the infrastructure and give all 10,000 banks access to this kind of availability of this kind of service moving forward.
So that's going to be the last word. If you had another question, hopefully we can get them speakers as they're still here. Thank you all so much, and really appreciate the great discussion in the panel.